Okay, let's finish up chapter 1 today by talking about Paul's credentials, because Paul does. Paul talks about it. In verse 11, he says this, "For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." You can look at that if you need to in Acts chapter 9. You see the story of Paul's conversion. He was a very religious Pharisee, a very Jewish person, persecuting Christians until Jesus came to him, revealed himself to him, and said, "Guess what? I am God, and you're on the wrong side." And so Paul has a conversion experience, and now he's teaching about this truth, this revelation he's received, that the gospel is simpler than he used to think that it was. Now, but right away we notice in chapter 1, and we'll see it again in chapter 2, Paul has to establish his credibility. He wants to make sure people understand that what he is saying is really from Jesus. Now, he admits that he used to be legalistic. He goes on and he says, "You have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. So extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers." So again, because remember, Paul's coming here to tell them, you don't have to follow all the Jewish rules. It turns out that's not how you get to be righteous in God's sight. And it was amazing that he was the one speaking that, because if anyone could say they were righteous, Paul was the guy that could have said that because of his tradition, because of his pedigree, because of his study, because of his lifestyle. But in reality, God shocked him with the truth about grace. When God came to him in Acts chapter 9, he was basically saying, all the stuff that you've been doing isn't going to save you. You need to put your faith in Jesus Christ to save you. In fact, this is how he articulates it in verse 15. He says, "But when he who had set me apart before I was born and who called me by his grace," there's that word grace. We're going to see that over and over again. "When he was pleased to reveal his son to me, Jesus, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles." So he's talking about the fact that the grace of God brought him to the place that he's at now, which is where he's no longer a Pharisee. He's no longer a bigwig in the Jewish church. Now he's just a Christian going around trying to tell everyone else that he's met Jesus, and that it turns out that everyone can meet Jesus, and that you don't have to be some special person born into a special family with all this special education, even though Paul was all of those things. But if you look at this, Paul is saying all of this to establish something. He's saying, listen, even though I wasn't one of the original disciples, he says, I'm still an apostle by virtue of the fact that Jesus appeared to him and specifically chose him, specifically picked him out and said, you're going to go and spread this gospel around. So Paul is indeed an apostle, even though he's not one of the original 12 disciples. It's important for us to recognize that because Paul writes a lot of the letters in the New Testament. So let's go back to Galatians 1:1 and read this again. He says, Paul, an apostle. So maybe that has a little bit of a different meaning for us now that we've read the rest of the chapter. He says, Paul, an apostle, not from men nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. Now, before you wrap up chapter 1, why don't you pause and talk about these questions before you move on? And don't forget, after you've talked about these questions and once you're done for the day, make sure that you reread this chapter 1, on your own, and then read chapter 2 before you come for the next lesson.